Very special lecturer. It's a new friend of ours here. He is Dr. David Vine, a professor of anthropology at the American University in Washington, D.C. Doctor, welcome to KUAM.
Happy day. Thank you so much.
All right, good to have you on the island out here. Now, it's interesting we have you in studio. It's a very poignant time because your specialty is in the impact of militarization. You've done a lot of research in this area and everything, so maybe talk a little bit about generally what your studies have entailed.
Sure. I'm working on a book right now about U.S. military facilities, bases, installations of all kinds around the world, but especially outside the 50 states and D.C. So I'm actually coming to the end of the research. I've been doing research in Japan, South Korea, Honduras, Ecuador, Italy, Germany, and now I feel very lucky that my research has taken me to Guam.
Well, lots of material here, and certainly you'll get a lot of feedback, from, I would say, from both sides of the argument. So, generally speaking, what are some of the arguments for and against, the realignment of troops and militarization in, those countries and other places that you mentioned?
There are some definite patterns to those sorts of arguments. As I think has been seen here, many of the proponents of military bases and their presence talk about the economic benefits, the security benefits, the need to have a military presence as a deterrent force. Many of the opponents are quite concerned about many of the impacts on local communities, the health impacts, the environmental impacts, cultural impacts, the impact on the sovereignty of a nation, or in this case, I think Guam's relative sovereignty or relative democratic representation is a key issue when it comes to the presence of bases here.
Mm-hmm. And have your studies also taken you, I would assume they would have, to studying like the history of Hawaii and how the military has affected, what eventually became like a state there? Yeah,
absolutely. My initial research on military bases was about the island of Diego Garcia, which I'll be talking about next week. It's a small island in the middle of the Indian Ocean where the U.S. has a very large military base that was created only by expelling the entire indigenous people there, about 1,200 miles away. They were dumped in exile. As part of that research, I did look at a range of similar cases, Hawaii, Guam, the Marshall Islands, and a number of others where military facilities were built and in the process people were displaced.
Mm-hmm. Now, as you've noted, usually the indigenous people and the community within like a territory or a country or, a kingdom, what have you, whatever the status of that place, normally they have, again, a certain amount of pushback, and like you said, they don't want to lose their identity and they don't want to have that many facilities and troops come in and, possibly change the culture of the place. What has history shown us as far as how the U.S. has been able to work with those places and say, this could be a positive, fortuitous relationship and everything? And in some cases, has it ever, been called off?
That's interesting. I think you see a range of relationships. I think generally the military does take steps to improve relationships with local communities, to build connections with local communities. But typically in many places you do see considerable tensions between military personnel, military base, and the local community. In terms of cases where a facility has been called off, none are coming to mind right now, but there are a number of cases where U.S. military facilities have been closed after having been established for some period of time. Ecuador is one case where I was able to visit recently, where after 10 years the country didn't renew the lease on the U.S. base there. The case of Vieques is probably one that's known to many in Guam, where after a long struggle, the people of Vieques won the removal of the Navy's base there and testing facilities. Mm-hmm.